Hey everyone, now we're going to talk about the autosomal dominant pedigree. So, in an autosomal dominant pedigree, any individual that has that dominant characteristic, big A, just as an example, is going to have the disorder. The only way you know that you don't have a big A, or the only people that don't have the disorder are people that don't have that big A. So these would be no disorder. And so in an autosomal dominant disease or disorder, you can have offspring that are unaffected even if the parents are affected. And so in this case, because we know both parents are affected, they have to have at least one big A, right? We also know that the offspring is not affected with two little a's, so then we know each parent is heterozygous. So let's look at this chart then. We have mom and dad. Again, both parents are heterozygous, and they have whatever the disorder is, okay, right here. They produce 4 offspring, and the offspring, 2 of them have the disorder, which means they have at least one big A. They also produce 2 offspring that have no disorder. So we know both parents have to be heterozygous because they gave the little a's over here, but they have the disorder, so they have big A's. We will never know if this girl has a recessive allele or a dominant allele unless she gets married and has children with someone who is autosomal recessive. So over here, we know this girl is heterozygous because she married somebody who is homozygous recessive. If she was homozygous dominant, then all of her children would have one of those big A's. But this person gave a little a to each of her children. He, on the other hand, gave a big A over here. He gave a big A here, but he gave his little a right there. So he has to be heterozygous, and then each of these children, we know what they are as well, since we have a mom who is homozygous recessive and a dad who is heterozygous. Over here, we have a girl who is homozygous recessive. She marries a homozygous recessive boy, and they have all recessive offspring. So that's how you follow a pedigree chart, and for autosomal dominance, that's how you would follow it. So let's look at a couple of the autosomal dominant disorders. The first is Marfan syndrome. So this is a connective tissue disorder. Connective tissue is the most common tissue in the body, and it includes bones are connective tissue, not muscles, I'm sorry. Your ligaments are connective tissue. Your cartilage is connective tissue. Ligaments, it's super common. Blood is connective tissue. All right. So what happens is this is a disorder of elastic connective tissue protein called fibrillin. And so fibrillin typically will allow you to have some flexibility, but not too much. This disorder, people that have this disorder tend to have extreme flexibility. That's one of the side effects of this disorder. And so over here is someone showing how they can bend their fingers. So that's very atypical. You can try it, but don't hurt yourself because it's very atypical. There are other pictures as well on the internet. I found this one at jivamatherapy.com. Okay. So we find fibrillin in the lenses of our eyes, in bones, in fingers, in ribs, and in the aorta. So the bones tend to be more flexible and that means they're not as protective. We end up having problems with sight because of the lens. We tend to have very long limbs that aren't as protective, long fingers, very, very flexible. Oftentimes we have a caved in chest, so there's like almost an indentation in the sternal region of the body, and a more weak aorta, which can cause us to be more prone to aneurysm. I actually have another picture showing hyperflexibility of the elbow, and you can see that long limb as well. So that's Marfan syndrome. And then we have Huntington disease. Huntington's disease is a neurological disease, and it leads to progressive degeneration of brain cells. So this is caused by a gene, a mutated gene for Huntington, for a protein called Huntington. And there are multiple copies of this, so it's like a repeated copy of this gene that causes this disorder, okay? This disorder is autosomal dominant, and it doesn't appear typically until around age 50 or older. And because of that, most people have already had their children. This leads to passing on the disorder, even though the disorder is deadly, because it does end in death of the individual. You lose the ability to do certain things. So just like with Alzheimer's disease, you lose the ability to do certain things, but with Huntington's disease, you still typically have your faculties with you for the majority of the time. They do have tests that allow you to identify if you have that Huntington's gene, so you know if you are positive or negative, or if you're going to have that disorder and can pass it on. And so this is what Huntington's disease looks like in the brain. So here we have normal neurons in the brain, lots of them. Over here we have loss of neurons, so loss of the interaction and the information in a Huntington's brain. All right, I'm going to stop here, and we'll get into beyond simple inheritance patterns, and we'll talk about incomplete dominance and codominance. Super exciting stuff. Bye.